Welcome to the Down South Hunting Podcast, Episode 1 with Adam Cruz and Mike Higman. In this first episode, we're going to introduce ourselves, the format of the podcast, and we're going to cap it off with our very first interview with Daryl Ratajczak. The Down South Hunting Podcast, just as the name implies, is a focused podcast on hunting in the South. So everything we talk about, whether it's whitetail hunting, turkey hunting, small game hunting, predator hunting, it's all going to have a slant towards the Southern hunter. We want to have one interview per month, and then all the weeks in between, we want to fill in with many episodes focused on strategy, tactics, and a real strong focus on biology. As a personal intro on my side, I'm from Tennessee. I've hunted in the states of Alabama, North Carolina, Montana, Colorado. Hunting has been who I am and what I love to do. It's a passion of mine, so much so that I've started a hunting blog called Chase the Mountain, where I'll go in and I'll talk about my hunting goals, tactics, strategies, even the hunting culture. Just really, I've been wrapped up with hunting my entire life, and talking about hunting has been something that I've been passionate about. Mike and I have talked about doing a podcast, and we both were looking at, what's a niche in the industry that no one else is focused on, and it's the Southern hunter. There's millions of us. I was just looking at a QDMA map of who has the most members per state, and the Southeast comprises almost the top 8 there. So there's tons of hunters in the South. Most of your hunting podcasts are focused on the Northeast, the Midwest, or Western hunting. So we're glad to finally be able to bring to you a Southern hunting focused podcast. With all that said, Mike, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, man, I'm so excited we're finally getting this going. We've been working on it for a while, and I'm just pumped that we're getting this going. Like you said, we're going to be doing this for Southern hunters, but we also are going to have good info for hunters all across the country. One, I think some of our topics are just going to be interesting to listen to if you're into hunting. We're going to try to get into alligator hunting and some of the different things and tactics we do in the South. We might talk a little bit about dog hunting and some of the different things that we do here. But we're going to have biologists on. We're going to have deer behavior guys, tactics, like you said. And I'm excited that we got something for guys in the South, but I think it's going to appeal to all hunters. Talking about myself a little bit, I'm a late adult onset hunter, as Randy Newberg calls us. I didn't start hunting until I was about 25, but what I've lacked in experience, I think I make up for in passion. I'm really excited about hunting, something I think about just about all the time. Of course, my wife and 4 kids are number one priority, that and my Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. But I can't get enough of hunting. I hunt a lot of public land here in Florida, and I'm working on some other private stuff as well, getting involved in some food plots, and we're going to talk about all that stuff as well. Let's go ahead and get Daryl on the line. I'm really excited about what he's got to talk about. He's a wildlife biologist, used to work for the state of Tennessee, and now he's out in New Mexico. But I think he's going to have a ton of information to offer us hunters.
And we have on the phone with us Daryl Ratajczak. Daryl, how you doing tonight?
I'm doing just fine, Adam. I appreciate you inviting me on tonight.
Hey, I appreciate you taking the time to jump on this call with us. I've been thinking about this podcast, as you know, for, probably going on 6 months. And during that period of time, I've been thinking, do we talk about turkey? Do we talk about elk, whitetail? And I kind of lean towards the other two. And now Mike and I have kind of collaborated on this Down South hunting podcast, and whitetails is where we're at. So I'm amped up and ready to discuss some of this stuff.
Sounds good. I can talk about whatever animal you want to talk about. It's just one of those things that, heck, as long as it's about hunting, I'm there.
Yeah, I think we can all agree on that one. Well,
yep, I can.
Well, as we get started, Daryl, why don't you tell us a little bit about your hunting background, your career as it relates to wildlife research and biology and all that good stuff?
Where to begin? I won't go back too far, but let's see. I've been hunting for probably, it's going on 35 years. I'll give you away my age. I'm 47 years old, but been hunting almost all my life. I got to give my dad all the credit for getting me into it. In fact, when I was just a wee little boy, that's how I knew exactly what I wanted to do, because my dad used to take me hunting and fishing. Grew up in upstate New York, just outside of Buffalo, New York. And the best couple of weeks throughout the entire year was when my dad took me to the old hunting cabin, Charlie's Cabin, in western New York. And right from the get-go, I knew that's exactly what I want to do for the rest of my life, is live that vacation, my dad's vacation of hunting and fishing. And if I can make a career out of that, that's what I want to do. So I went ahead, got my degree in wildlife management from Syracuse University as a College of Environmental Science and Forestry. And then, as luck would have it, after I got my degree, found my way all the way down to Tennessee back in 1997. And I started working with black bears outside of Great Smoky Mountain National Park, and then did that for about 5 years. And I latched on to the Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency and began working my way up through the agency, first as a wildlife manager, but then my experience working with black bears in the Smokies got me the gig of the big game coordinator for the state of Tennessee. And I did that for about 7 years. I was over the deer program in the state of Tennessee, as well as the bear, the elk, and the wild boar program at the time. That program doesn't exist anymore, but did the big game management. And then the last 5 years I was with the agency, I moved up to be chief of wildlife for the state of Tennessee. And believe it or not, I found out when you move really high up in an organization, you're not in the woods anymore. And so I was spending most of my time at commission meetings and donning a suit and coat and attending conferences and no longer doing what I love to do. And so 2 years ago, or about a year and a half ago, made a big leap of faith and decided to pursue a dream of living and working out west. So I latched on with the U.S. Forest Service, and now I'm working in Santa Fe, New Mexico, working on the Santa Fe National Forest in northern New Mexico, and it is absolutely amazing out here. I look out my front window and I see a mountain that has bighorns and elk and bears, and it's just an absolute dream of mine, being able to live my career and do what I love doing with wildlife.
That's awesome.
That's really cool.
Well, what made you choose New Mexico? I know you said it was your dream to move out west, so I'm really curious on New Mexico.
Well, I wanted somewhere in the Rockies. I'm a mountain guy. I'm so much more a mountain guy than an ocean guy. And my main goal was getting on in the federal side of things, because you have so much more mobility when you're either with the Forest Service or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And believe it or not, the first offer I had was with Tongass National Forest in southeastern Alaska. And as I was asking questions about that position, it would have been fantastic. I would have been working with grizzlies and all the other amazing animals up in Alaska. But I've got two boys. One in high school, one in 8th grade. And when I asked about the schooling where I would be stationed, the boys would have to take a boat to school. And so it didn't sit well with them. Then the next position that was offered was Ruby Valley National Wildlife Refuge in Nevada. And it's the most remote wildlife refuge in the lower 48. And again, when I asked about schooling, they said we'd have to find foster parents that were in town where my kids could stay. And so,
wow.
Yeah, I had to rule out Nevada and Alaska, and sure enough, the third place they called me was Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I knew that had more than 1,000 people in it. So I latched on there.
Yeah. Well, you're still 47 years young, so yeah. maybe those jobs will cycle around, because that sounds really cool to me.
Yeah, I got to wait till the kids are at least off to college before I go playing in the woods too much longer. So
yeah,
most hunters would say that becoming a wildlife biologist is pretty much a dream job, anyways. And to do that, and then to also move out west, that's just got to be like icing on top of the cake. So that's really cool. Good story.
I pinch myself all the time just being able to wake up every day and do what I do. It's absolutely amazing.
Did you do much hunting when you were up in New York?
Yeah, up in New York, it's nothing like in the South where you could pretty much begin hunting as soon as you're out of diapers. Up in New York, you had to be at least 12 years old to small game hunt, and you had to be 14 years old to big game hunt. And I couldn't wait. I was shooting a bow ever since I was, I don't even know how small, but as soon as I turned 14, I got my first deer with a bow. And yeah, my main passion is archery hunting, and I've been doing it ever since I was able to.
I know up there they do a lot of. Did you get into like big woods tracking and that kind of stuff?
No, it was the hunting up there. The deer hunting up there was always fantastic. The turkey hunting was, put it this way, we would still take a week off to go turkey hunting up in western New York. And if we had a good week, that meant we heard a bird 1 or 2 days. And so the
Wow.
turkey hunting was not near as good as it is in Tennessee. I tell you what, Tennessee, I don't want to drag too many people there because
Don't do it.
Yeah.
Okay, I won't.
I'm joking.
Tennessee is terrible. Don't go.
Yeah.
It's amazing. I tell you what, Middle Tennessee is probably the best turkey hunt you'll find anywhere in the country.
I have a video of opening day turkey season in Tennessee, and I've told my brother. My brother's been like, as a matter of fact, he messaged me beforehand. He's like, hey, when am I going to see that video? And I'm saying, man, I am not putting that out there. There's like 12 strutters, 30 hens. I'm talking about putting on a parade all the way down to the gun barrel. I just don't even think I want people to see that in Tennessee, you know, but it's good hunting.
It's amazing that when I first started turkey hunting in Tennessee, I had one of the guys from TWRA took me out, and it was the last weekend of the season. And now, albeit this is 10, 12 years ago, and the last weekend of the season, we had 60 birds parade in front of us, and more than half of them were gobblers. And it was just, I could not believe what I was seeing. And it's like I said, it's a hidden gem over there.
It really is. And I'm hoping next year we can get you on and we can talk about turkey hunting for sure, because I would love to talk about some of the fluctuations in populations. As you know, that's a hot topic in Middle Tennessee and a lot of different places in the South, especially where there's, the chicken farms in northern Alabama and that sort of thing. So next year I cannot wait to talk the biology of the wild turkey and get your opinions on what might be going on on the ground. And I'm really happy to hear that the TWRA is doing a lot of research on that, and it's an interesting topic for sure.
You guys can take me to school a little bit on turkey hunting.
It's going to be fun.
I'd love to talk about that as well, so I'll be there.
Awesome. Let's change gears a little bit and talk a little bit about whitetails. I think that's where we want to focus most of this podcast on, and really what we were hoping to do is learn more about the summertime behavior of a whitetail and that summertime behavior and as it transitions into the fall hunting season, and really just kind of want to start out with deer nutrition. So a lot of us hunters, I know everyone's kind of transitioning now from turkey hunting over into thinking about deer hunting, and the first thing we think about is, putting out minerals or corn or our trail cameras. Now is the time to start doing that. So I want to get from you, Daryl, any kind of information you can give to us on improving our deer herd health, and anything that we might be able to do, if it's even possible, for antler growth, and just kind of get your thoughts around that.
I'd be happy to talk to you about that. And I believe I warned you on the front end that sometimes a lot of hunters don't like what I have to say because it's counter to what they may read, especially if they're reading it in a magazine off the shelf. Because here it is, I'm a biologist, spent my entire career studying and managing deer. And the sad thing is, or the unfortunate thing, and it's understandable, but hunters are always looking for a shortcut. What can I do the easiest way to maximize my deer herd? And I will be the first to tell you, and I'm not going to cite individual studies, but it's because you can't point to an individual study that ever says if you feed this, then you're going to grow monster deer. It just doesn't happen that way. The thing is with deer, everyone knows the equation to grow big deer. The deer need age, they need the proper nutrition, and they need the genetics. But the thing is, when it comes to that magic bullet, or whether or not it's a mineral or feed, nothing increases antler size. Literally, all you're trying to do whenever you're trying to provide nutrition to whitetail is to maintain them in the highest possible condition, the healthiest condition they can be at. And so they're only going to grow X amount of antler regardless of what you feed them. They're only predetermined to grow a certain amount. And so nothing you can add is ever going to increase that. And that's one of those, I understand it, it's a marketing tool. And so put it this way, if there was such a product, don't you think it would be, all the research would point to it and everybody would be using it, and deer would just be going nuts all over the place.
Dropping truckloads of it.
Yeah, and so the key is there's a lot of great products out there, but they're not designed to increase the amount of antler that a deer can grow. Nothing can do that. All those products, whether or not it's seed, feed, or minerals, all those products are seeking to do is make sure that deer is as healthy as it could be. And so, there's lots of ways you can go about it. I just want people to have realistic expectations when it comes to deer hunt, because if you have those unrealistic expectations, the end result is always disappointment, because you'll never meet those if they're not achievable.
So I've got a question kind of along those lines then. My understanding is that nutritional needs first go towards an animal's basically recovering its optimal body size and bone structure. And, if they got to recover from a harsh winter, or, their first priority is growth and being healthy, like you're saying. And then I've heard after that, then they start, putting some of those resources towards antler. So could increasing their health by supplementing their food also help their antlers, not directly because what's in the food is helping their antlers grow, but it helps their body reach the optimal condition first, which means they can focus more on antler growth?
Yes, you said everything correct in the fact that if a deer comes out of the fall and out of the winter really run down, whether or not it's rut stress or stress from not having enough food, before a deer will ever start putting growth onto its head, it needs to replenish its body, in particular the skeletal aspects of its body, as well as the musculature. And so only then, once he's back in prime or good condition, will he then begin putting the bone on top of his head. And so throughout the winter time, one of the best things to do, obviously, and I don't care what biologist you talk to, if they're a wildlife biologist, their first and foremost answer should always be to maintain great habitat, because you have to understand that deer don't feed in the exact same spot all the time. They're always walking around, always moving, and eating away as they go. And although people may have a food plot, or heaven forbid, and I'll get back to this, heaven forbid a feeder, the deer aren't there all the time. And so if you have great habitat that's going to provide that forage for that deer year-round, then that deer is going to not have to recover much. He's going to be in good shape because he has those resources available no matter where he's at, no matter what time of year it's at. And so I will tell you, I remember, and this stuck out, and I was watching the television show, I bet you it was 15 years ago, and it was Jeff Foxworthy, Tecumseh Seed, and they were hunting down in Texas. And even though it was a seed company that was putting on the show, they first and foremost said, this is not something that the average hunter could produce, because they literally went all out and had food plots in as much as much of their farm as they possibly could. So they made sure that deer, no matter where it was on their farm, was eating something good. And they even admitted the average hunter can't do that. And you know as well as I, an average hunter may put out a small food plot here or there, but for the most part, the deer in Tennessee and throughout the entire Southeast, they're going to be wandering around in areas that is predominantly not food plot. And so you have to understand that trying to use whether or not it's feed or minerals or food plots to really maximize your deer, unless you're independently wealthy and you just plant great stuff everywhere, it's not going to happen. And so you do the best you can, make sure that deer have things available if they want it, but it's really difficult to change the health dynamics of a free-ranging deer herd.
Very interesting.
We're a little late to stop somebody here, but with that in mind, how do you feel about spring food plots or planting perennials so you can have food year round? Does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want anyone to think I'm against food plots. Again, all I'm trying to do is provide realistic expectation for hunters. And so putting out whatever food that you can, and I will without a doubt always recommend that you plant stuff instead of pour stuff. There's a lot of issues that come with supplemental feeding, but putting out food plots, obviously it's going to provide something more for your deer than if you didn't put anything out. And so the other thing, and this is the main reason that I always urge, the main reason I would use food plots, is instead of it being like a strategy to grow bigger deer, it's an awesome strategy to harvest or kill bigger deer, because you can absolutely use your food plots as an advantage when it comes to hunting. You can set up places to be able to kill deer. And so that's a wonderful thing about food plots, and I strongly encourage it, but I just don't want people thinking if they put in a couple acres of beans here or clover over there that they're suddenly going to have Boone and Crockett's walking around. It just doesn't work that way.
I completely get that, and I guess like the perfect situation for most hunters in the South is if you can hunt over, say, like a soybean field early, right there at bow before it turns, and then maybe have a food plot for later in the. As
well as I mean, regardless of what food plot you plant, whether or not it's clover, bean, anything, what is the one thing that Mother Nature produces that is going to draw every deer from around wherever it's at? As soon as those white oak acorns, as soon as the acorns start dropping, they're eating natural foods. And so you have to understand deer evolved without this concept of food plots. And that's one thing I try telling people is, you flash back 30 years ago, there was no such thing as food plots. There was deer eating the farmer's corn is what there was. And so it wasn't a lot of people nowadays, because what they either see on TV or read in magazines, they think deer need food plots, and that couldn't be further from the truth. Food plots are a product of hunters' imaginations, and they're fantastic tools, but they're definitely not a necessary item for any wild animal out there. They just evolved without them.
What would you recommend as far as minerals go for not antler development, but for the deer health? Is there anything that you would recommend hunters put out there?
As far as the combination of what minerals you're looking for in there, obviously most of it, what you're going to find is going to be made up of salt, but to make sure you have a good balance of the phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, those trace elements that the deer need, they don't need large amounts of it, but it's something that their body needs in order to maintain that health. It could be just a little bit of it, but I will tell you, I firmly believe in minerals. I used them all the time, but once again, it wasn't to grow anything on the deer. I think what the best use of a mineral product is, and obviously one that has high salt concentration because it really draws deer, you could use those mineral supplements as a fantastic way of helping to manage your farm for deer by conducting an inventory, using trail cameras. And you get a lot of deer coming into mineral sites because their body craves that salt. And so you can get a good inventory of what deer are on your property, and it truly makes you a better hunter. When you know what you have, whether or not it's the number of bucks, number of does, obviously there's an art and there's a science to it. You just don't take what you see on the camera as that's all you have. Like I said, there's a science to conducting trail camera surveys, but man, are they a wonderful, wonderful tool if you're truly wanting to manage your farm for whatever animal, especially white-tailed deer.
So let's circle back around to the supplemental feeding, since we're kind of talking about bringing deer into trail cameras. I know, a lot of hunters in the South and other places, and I know in Kentucky it's legal to actually hunt over corn, just throwing out corn on the ground. Are there any dangers in doing that, or is that recommended, or what's your feelings towards that particular subject?
Well, first off, you have to understand I'm a wildlife biologist. But being a wildlife biologist, I was also a deer biologist. As a deer biologist, I would never recommend putting out supplemental feed. And I know that's not, if you ask other deer biologists, you might not get the same answer. But the reason I tell you about not putting out supplemental feed is more from an all wildlife standpoint. And the reason being there's truly no studies that I know of, and if you find something, by all means, I'm all ears for it. But there's never been any studies that show you put out supplemental feed and you're going to grow bigger deer, you're going to grow bigger antlers. There just isn't. In fact, there have been studies conducted on wildlife management areas where they did try providing supplemental feed, and they found no difference in body size using the feed or not using the feed. And so there's really no evidence to suggest it does any good. Having said that, there's a lot of studies that show it could have a negative effect. Now don't get me wrong, it's not something that's guaranteed to happen, but there's certain disease issues you have to worry about. Thankfully, in Tennessee and most of the Southeast, you don't have the CWD issue, although they're starting to get it in Missouri and some of the other states. You do have to worry about disease whenever you're using a feeder, because it congregates animals and they have nose-to-nose contact, and that helps spread disease. But that's such a small risk. I tell you what, the thing that's been brewing in the back of my mind, and I cannot wait until more studies come out, is there's a great deal of concern, especially in the Southeast, regarding coyotes and fawn recruitment, and the fact that they're having much more of an impact than we ever imagined. And as a deer hunter, it concerns me that we don't have that recruitment, we don't have that fawn survival that really makes for great deer hunting. And the funny thing is, people will put out deer feeders to try to help their deer, not knowing the impacts of the negative impacts it may be having. And the only reason I say that is there's been studies, for example, that show nest predation, like wild turkeys and quail and those ground nesting birds. They have much lower survival rates around deer feeders than elsewhere, simply because it's a draw for the predators. So coyotes, bobcats, they go where these animals concentrate. And obviously what concentrates animals? Deer feeders. And so just drawing that line to say, hey, if turkeys may be preyed upon at deer feeders, why can't fawns? We know coyotes are having an impact on fawns. And so you may unknowingly be reducing your fawn recruitment simply because you're putting feeders out. And now there's no studies that have linked that yet, but it's just one of those things that I really hope they look more into it, because just like coyote numbers are expanding, it seems like the use of deer feeders and all the supplemental feeding is also expanding. And it could be that perfect storm where we're just making it too easy for the predators to have an impact on our deer herds.
Wow. Well, that's definitely an interesting take on that. I haven't heard that before, but it certainly sounds like that's a possibility.
Yep.
I've got a question along with that. Then let's say I'm the president of a hunting club somewhere in the Southeast, and we got, I don't know, 600 acres, and I know that there's 6 clubs around me, and every single one of those guys are using feeders, and I feel like that's what I need to do to compete with the neighbors. If I'm going to do that, do you think it would help if they were to not use feeders maybe during the fawning season and then, during the seasons when there's more young, given what you were saying?
It definitely needs to be looked into more. I'm not about to say what would work, what wouldn't work. It's just something to think about, because it makes sense if deer are going to be concentrated in a very small area, which is exactly what a feeding station does, that you're more or less creating an ambush point. And so that's why food plots and just natural habitat, just really working to provide the best habitat possible, it's great for everything. It'll provide the food, the nutrition for the deer, but it also spreads it out. And so it makes it much more difficult for predators to have an impact when the deer are living, surviving in really good habitat. Now, when it comes to what your neighbors do, it's really important. I get asked the question all the time about, hey, I have this farm. What can I put in to draw deer to my farm? And I always say, number one, right off the bat, don't look at your farm. What you need to do before you even consider anything is go around all the surrounding properties, see what they have, because the key to really managing your property well is to look what's all around your property and find what's missing, whether or not it's cover, whether or not it's a specific type of food, whether or not it's water. Who knows what the limiting factor is? And if you can find out what you can offer on your property that the other properties can't, there's your golden ticket to drawing deer and holding deer on your property, is providing that thing that they want but they can't get anywhere else.
That's really interesting. I was talking to a guy last week at a trade show, and he's telling me he owns 3 acres in Kansas, and he drives like 2 hours to get there. But what he was telling me is basically what you just said. Like, all these other properties have certain components, but not all of them have this one. And if you do this one thing with your property, it can bring the deer in. So that is a really good point, and something that I think all of us, especially any of us that may have smaller properties that we hunt 20 acres or less, you may have some key to success right there if you can look at what's going on the farms around you. That's a golden nugget right there. Yep. Well, as far as deer in the summertime, so if we're looking at how far will deer travel in the summer, what are their normal core ranges? Is it a pretty small range? Is it a wide range? If we're looking at deer on our trail cameras and trying to keep track of them, how confident can we be that during the summertime that we can hold those deer if we have the ingredients they need: food, water, cover?
Yeah, the cool thing with that is the home range of a deer, or literally any animal, is all going to depend on its availability of resources. And so if you could provide everything that deer needs, you shrink his home range. And so by meeting all those basic life cycle needs, he doesn't have to leave the property. If you're providing everything he needs, he doesn't have to leave the property. Now, conversely, if he's got to travel quite a ways to find all the different foods he wants, all the water, all the cover, the ranges could be quite large. You're talking like many square miles. But there's been numerous studies, I think, down in Mississippi, looking in those mosaic type of pine thinnings that they did in a checkerboard fashion. It literally provides everything that deer wants, and you could have home ranges as small as a half mile. And so it's amazing how adaptable the animals are, and it all depends on how available the resources are to them. And so once again, the key to managing anything, deer in particular, is providing that great habitat. And a key component, usually everybody always immediately jumps to food plots, what kind of food or what can I provide the animals to eat. And a lot of times the thing that the deer so often need is that cover. They need that thick, early successional, just gnarly stuff that they can get into and feel comfortable all day long and just not have to worry about anything.
I'm getting the feeling that you're saying we should put up our tractors and grab our chainsaws. Am I right there?
In some situations, yeah. Tractors work good, but depending on what's going on everywhere else on the farm and on your neighbor's place, it could be a chainsaw. Heck, you know what else is a great tool, but obviously you need lots of training. Prescribed fire will do amazing for replenishing the nutrients in the ground, and then sure enough, up comes all this natural gnarly stuff that the deer absolutely love.
Daryl, I know here in Florida you can work with the Forestry Service and have them manage that type of thing on the property. Did you deal with that type of stuff in Tennessee as well?
Our Tennessee Wildlife Resources Agency has a number of biologists. They're called private land biologists that can provide amazing resources, amazing technical advice to any landowner that wants to do that stuff on their property. And oftentimes they'll even help do cost shares to get in some of those farm bill programs. And by all means, I'd strongly look up, have anyone look up on the agency's website for those private lands biologists. I got to tell you though, it's funny because being in Tennessee for the last 20 years, and you do a prescribed burn, and a big burn might be 10 acres. Then here in New Mexico, we're doing a burn tomorrow that's like 6,000 acres, and it's just amazing how much fire plays a role in the ecosystem. And we as humans kind of squashed that and eliminated fire from the landscape, and we're learning we got to put it back on the landscape to make things look good again.
Yeah, I wish it were something that were a little easier to do, that you could just pick a Saturday and go with it. But it is real helpful when you can work with, biologists and actually people that do it professionally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you absolutely need some training, and you can't just go out there and start burning your field. By all means, contact the agency and look up some of those biologists and get some technical advice that you need.
I got a bunch of buckets. I'll just fill them with water. We'll be good to go.
Yeah.
Good deal. Is that usually a paid service from the state? I mean, do you have to pay the TWRA to come in and to do these burns, or do you have to pay for consulting, or is that tax dollar funded?
For the most part, it all depends on the situation. Providing the technical advice, that's their job. That's what those private land biologists are paid to do. Is we're trying to get good habitat on the ground, and we know that 95% of the land in Tennessee, for example, is in private ownership, and so to be able to provide that technical advice for landowners to do the right thing that's good and beneficial for wildlife, that's their job. Now, having said that, whenever there's something that requires a lot of personnel or something that's out of the ordinary, that's where it gets a little tricky to see how much help we could provide. But man, if we can get the landowners to do the right stuff on their properties, that's what they're there for.
Good deal. That's something that I'm thinking about right now as we're talking. I should have done this a long time ago. I hunt on a family farm down in the southern part of the state and just got that land down there, and you should have had someone down there, helping support that all along. But I think that's something I'll definitely do next year for sure. I wanted to ask you too about going back to that question of this core range of a whitetail. generally speaking, a lot of Southerners, I know I have in the past, I've hunted big hardwoods right beside cow pastures, and that's pretty much what my hunting's always looked like, is hardwoods and cow pastures. And a lot of times I've had deer that all the qualities, all the components to hold deer on the property, but as you know, getting past September 31st, it's like the deer, they move, their core ranges move, and then you may even have new deer move in. And I've oftentimes wondered why that is. Like, if I have everything to hold a deer, why would deer leave and then get new deer in, and it's not yet even the pre-rut? Is there a reason for that, or can you give me any kind of feedback on what's going on there?
Well, deer respond. They respond tremendously to pressure, and so that's why I love archery season. You're usually out there with unpressured deer, but the later you go, and the longer time it goes with hunters being in the woods, even if they're not shooting off guns, just the mere presence and smell of hunters being in the woods gets the deer to change their patterns. And so what typically may be a bedding area or a feeding area may shift once that pressure becomes too much for them. I don't know if it's kind of a last straw type of deal where they finally said, enough's enough, I'm going somewhere else. But they're incredibly intelligent animals. You're living, or when you go out there set foot in the woods, you're walking into their living room. And so if you're sitting in your house watching TV and someone walks in your house, you know it, or you know, and so you might change where you are, or you might grab your gun, obviously. But deer are going to change their patterns, change what they normally do based on the amount of pressure that they're seeing. Now, I will tell you, you bring up a really good point about deer coming in from other areas. The one thing that I want to dispel, because I know some people sometimes get confused, where if they put up, whether or not they have a food plot or a mineral site, trying to draw deer in. There was actually a study that I read, and I forget who did it, but whenever you have something to attract a deer, like I said, either a food source or a mineral site, you're only going to get deer that their home range encompasses that area. So in other words, you're not going to draw in deer from 10 miles away, because the deer will just never encounter that area. And so you just have to understand that you can only do so much. I know people want to grow really big deer and attract lots of deer, but you'll only be able to do what the land can support. And so that's one thing that I found really interesting, is a lot of people have hopes of drawing in deer from a long ways off, and that just doesn't happen. But it is crazy, though, because you always end up with pictures of deer you've never seen before during the fall. But that's usually the result of the rut going on and deer going bonkers at that time.
I have heard Bill Winke talk about, and this doesn't counter what you say, but just kind of goes along with it some, is he tries to make sure they have some really good late season food sources, because it's harder to and I think the Wachowskis talk about it too. It's harder for deer to find food then, so they're looking further. And once they find it, then they're more likely to permanently move there once they find it.
Yes. Yeah, and another thing to remember is during that rut, it's been shown when they've had some bucks with radio collars on it that will have like a very small core range, and then they'll just out of the blue go on a long distance jaunt. In fact, they documented some deer literally traveling 10 linear miles to an area, spending a couple of days, and then coming right back. So the key to all that is throughout their travels, whether or not they're on one of those jaunts or in search of food, the deer has to stumble upon it. They're not just going to they don't know that saying, the grass is greener on the other side. So they're not going to be sitting there and say, hey, I wonder what's on that other side of the mountain, and just go on the other. The way they're more or less just going by their natural instincts to find food or to find love.
See how many ladies are on the other block.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, as we go ahead, Mike.
I did have another question about the seeing different deer. Could some of that be bachelor groups breaking up, and maybe the big dog in the area doesn't want the guys he was hanging out with? So basically, he's running those guys out, and meanwhile, the guys that were hanging out with the buck on the other farm are heading the other way, kind of switching up just due to deer getting more aggressive once their velvet comes off.
Yeah, I absolutely loved it. For about 5 years, when I was a deer coordinator in Tennessee, I was conducting these thermal imaging studies. We were trying to get a better handle on the deer population in the state. And so literally for a number of summers in a row, my job started at about 7 o'clock at night and would go until about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And we would just be looking at deer in the summertime, more or less getting buck-to-doe ratios and trying to calculate this population question. And the thing that was always awesome, especially when we were doing the buck-to-doe ratios, is we drive around, and you have to understand when you're using those thermal cameras in the summertime, it's really, really easy to differentiate between bucks and does because the camera detects heat. And when the bucks are in velvet, their antlers glow. And so you can see a buck from a long ways off. But whenever we'd start the route, we'd be driving around and we'd see doe after doe after doe. And pretty soon you'd have like 20 does and only 1 or 2 bucks. And automatically someone would be thinking, man, these buck-to-doe ratios are way screwed up. But then you turn the corner and there's a field full of 12 bucks because they're in these bachelor groups. And so that's oftentimes
I want to hunt that farm.
Yeah, well, no, actually on the contrary, because people would ask me, well, how do I get these bachelor bucks like to come to my farm? And the key is not getting the bucks on your farm. The key is keeping the does on your farm, because as soon as the fall hits and those bachelor groups break up, they're going to be looking for does. And so I was always happier whenever I was running trail cameras on any of the farms I hunted. If I had a really great farm that had lots of does, it was like clockwork. You can depend on the bucks to show up. What always worried me, and I did have a couple of farms where my summertime camera census would just, all I'd do is get pictures of bucks, and it would be very tempting and teasing to think, oh man, this is great. But every single time, as soon as the fall hunting season came around, those bucks disappeared. They were off to find does. And so if I was ever going to say, tell anyone running these trail cameras, I would be a whole lot happier just having really good doe pictures all the time, because you're going to be drawing the bucks when that rut comes along. Man,
that is some serious value right there. That's definitely something to keep in mind. Yeah, that might change the way you think a little bit.
Let's talk.
Don't get me wrong; it's still nice to see those bachelor groups of bucks.
Sure.
Yeah, I guess when the rut hits, though, you need the ladies in there to bring in the bucks and how to keep them there. That's
Absolutely.
the main thing. Well, talking about the rut, the South is notoriously known for having a crazy rut swing. I know where I grew up hunting, the rut would hit around Thanksgiving. Where I live now, it hits kind of more traditionally in that Midwestern type time frame, maybe a little bit later, more like the November 11th time frame, in my opinion. I know this has probably been a really discussed and talked about topic throughout the hunting world and industry, but why is it that happens in the South? And here I want to preface it with this. In the West, in the Western states, you have elk dropping at certain times for survival rates, which is not really the case in the South. Is that because the deer that have been transplanted to the South are just genetically made up that way, or what's really the reasoning behind the fluctuation in rut dates?
Now, that's a fantastic question. But you have to go back to basic biology. The West, along with the North, and those two geographic areas, whether or not you're in the plains or the Rocky Mountains or in the North, you are likely to have a severe winter. And so in order for offspring to survive, the animals have to drop their offspring as soon as that green up occurs. So it's got to be tightly timed, because if they drop them too early and you're still in a harsh winter, you're going to have very low survival rates. And so the ruts generally in the North, in the West in particular, even in the Midwest, they tend to be more tightly timed. The South, it's not as necessary, simply because you don't have that really harsh winter effect. If a deer drops a fawn in April, in the South, you really don't have to worry about that deer getting frozen, freezing to death. And so that's why you tend to have much longer rutting periods in the South. Because look at Florida. You could have the peak of the rut sometimes in January, sometimes even in February, because it matters not if that fawn is dropped in August or September. There's still going to be food on the ground for that.
In Florida, you could be across the street and the rut could be a couple months apart in some of the areas. It's crazy.
Oh yeah. It's extended because there's really not that need for a tightly timed fawn drop, because there will be there will be food available for the fawns and for not necessarily the fawns, but for the mother all throughout the year in Florida. Whereas in those places that have much harsher winters, you had better time it correctly so that the mother and the fawn invariably will have the food sources when she drops. And so that's why you in Tennessee, it's not nearly as bad as Florida. But Tennessee will have, in any particular area, will have about a 2 or 3 week window where that rut will occur. Now, it can vary. The one thing, I was looking through some of the questions you sent me, and about the rut hitting on the exact same days. Believe it or not, if you look at the data, and Tennessee had collected a ton of data historically, and found exactly when the rut was hitting in certain geographic areas. The one thing that always amazed me, and I love this part about it, is if the rut hit really hard, for example, November 18th to the 20th, the only thing you could count on is that it wasn't going to hit between the 18th and the 20th the following year. Usually it wiggled around, mm-hmm. and very rarely did it didn't land on the exact same day from one year to the next. Now it will fall in that same 2 week to 3 week window, and it usually slides around in there. But that's because these ruts and these fawn drops, everything is usually dictated by photo period, the amount of daylight, because that's the one thing that's consistent every single year. So if you look at September 1st, every single year, the temperature may be different from one year to the next. The moon phase may be different from one year to the next. The barometric pressure may be different. The only thing that's consistent is the amount of sunlight there is. And so that's what drives most of the biological, it's that circadian rhythm. That's what drives most of the biological functions, is the amount of daylight that the animals are exposed to.
So what you're trying to tell me is there's no way for me to figure out what vacation days to take right now to hit the rut.
No, that's the key. If you know exactly when it hit this past year, just don't hunt those days next year. You'll be good.
That blows my. That's why I'm not killing deer consistently. Yeah. Thanks, Daryl. I appreciate it. Killing big deer consistently. Thanks.
You're welcome.
I know a lot of biologists do. They'll backdate the rut days with the average of fetus sizes when they harvest does. Is there any way, like a layman's way, to do that by maybe with trail cam pictures or something like that? Let's say you can't even narrow the rut down to like what month of the year it is. Is there some way that we could do that?
Well, I wouldn't use. There's some good indicators. A lot of times, the best indicator is when the rut is occurring, is the number of roadkill. And if you, no lie, if you're driving to work and all of a sudden, sometime in November, you're just going to see a rash of roadkill, mark those dates down, because that's pretty much when the rut is really going full swing. And so, believe it or not, a lot of the you can predict a lot by the number of deer that are getting hit on the roads when the rut is in full swing. As far as looking at like when fawn drop occurs, it would be there's too much variation in there. The cool thing is you mentioned measuring the fetal size. That's actually pretty easy to do. And if anyone is interested in doing that, it's something that can be done. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand some people have heartburn over that, but it's truly it's much more accurate when you can use that fetal scale and literally it'll tell you count back 24 days, and then you know exactly when that deer was bred within a couple of days.
This just got me interested in thinking about this, but I've never checked a doe check the uterus for a fawn in there. But to guys talk about how tender fawn meat is, I can't imagine I think that makes
don't even go there.
Oh man, wrong trail.
Yeah, I know. Somebody out there's tried it and can tell me it's anyway.
But it's only doable those late season doe hunts, whether or not you're going late December or up into January. But it is very effective.
Yeah.
So, in your opinion, how does the moon phase affect all this? I think I already know the answer based off of what you've already said, but I just need to clarify.
Yeah, there's some people that will swear by it. I'm not one of them. And the reason being, like I said, the only thing that is consistent year in and year out is the photo period, the amount of daylight there is. And so that is what drives these biological processes. Now, having said that, literally how it will work is a deer's body or any animal's body will wait until it has a certain amount of daylight before a process triggers. And so, for example, the rut. They may wait until, and I'm making up this date because it varies in all geographic areas, but a deer's body may wait until about November 5th before a doe is ready to go into estrus. And literally, from that point forward, it is then a combination of factors. It could be weather, it could be moon phase, it could be a whole bunch of things that help trigger it, but it's not going to get triggered by one of those extraneous factors alone. Because a lot of people think, the temperature has to be right. The problem is in August, if it hits that magical temperature, not all the deer are going to go into estrus at the wrong time of year. So it's not. It has to be based off the one true consistent factor, and that's the photo period. And just so you know, I will tell you a funny story. I was interviewed probably 10 years ago when I was deer coordinator, and they asked me what triggers the rut. And I explained this whole thing that I'm explaining to you now, and they wrote a magazine article, and sure enough, I told them that photo period is the key factor. And sure enough, it says Daryl Ratajczak, deer coordinator for the state of Tennessee, says photosynthesis drives the deer rut.
Yeah, it's science.
Yes, so they got it slightly wrong.
That's
funny.
That is funny. It sounds like something I would do. Now I'm going to make sure that if I write a blog post on this, I do not put photosynthesis.
Yeah.
Two completely different processes. Photosynthesis makes leaves green.
Well, my funny story to all this is, in the beginning I said, you had your dream job living in your dream location. I always wanted to be a wildlife biologist. And when I got out of the Marine Corps, I went and I took like my first science class, and I just barely even passed that sucker. So photosynthesis, there's a reason I'm doing what I'm doing, and just enjoy writing and talking about hunting, and I'm not the biologist, that's for sure.
Yes.
Well, they don't want to have
I think we're coming up on time here, guys.
Yeah, it's kind of what I was going to say. Daryl, how can people reach out to you or follow you online, social media, website, anything like that?
Good question. Like I said, I'm living my dream out here. And the thing is, all I'm doing nowadays is having fun. I'm not stressing about commission meetings or anything. And one of the greatest things about that is I've been writing quite a bit. And so ever since I moved out west and had all these adventures in the Rocky Mountains, I've been writing this blog. And instead of me trying to give everyone on air my first and last name, which they'll never be able to spell, the easiest way to follow me, a couple of years ago, a buddy of mine taught me a new word, and that word was a nemophilist. Had no idea what that meant, and then I looked it up, and it was a lover of the forest. And so when I started writing a blog, I kind of did a play on that word. And so my blog, if you want to look it up on Google, you type in the word Nemo for like Finding Nemo, followed by philosophy. So Nemo philosophy is my thoughts on the forest. And so once you get there, you can read all my bear and cougar and deer and turkey stories. And then if you want to follow me on Facebook, there's kind of directions how to do that there. But right now I'm in the midst of turkey hunting adventures with my dad growing up. So hopefully people could get on there and kind of get a peek into what my career in hunting life has been like.
We'll put a link to that in the show notes on downsouthhunting.com, so we don't all have to figure out how to spell philosophy.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Awesome. I appreciate that, guys.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time, Daryl. Yeah, this is really interesting stuff. Some good info. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I feel bad because I go off on too many tangents, but man, I appreciate you asking me to drop by the show, and if you ever need me again, I'd be happy to help you out.
That sounds great. Thanks again, Daryl. Good talking to you. We'll be in touch soon.
All right.
See you later.
Well, that conversation with Daryl, for me personally, was long overdue. I've been chatting back and forth with Daryl over the last few weeks, I guess over a couple of months, just here and there, talking about some different things, deer hunting, and that was just a good conversation. He dropped a bunch of what I like to call some value bombs. And what'd you think about it, Mike?
Man, I thought that was really good too. I guess I got a bunch of corn piles out at my dad's place I got to clean up before all the fawns and poults get eaten. But man, I thought it was really great. He wasn't afraid to talk about some things that might be a little different, which I love. I like hearing something a little different opinions, and I think he's got some sound reasoning to back some of that stuff up.
No, same way. I love it when you have science to back up your opinions on things. And I think everyone out there, just remember, at the end of the day, we're all hunters, and we need to support one another. But hey, it's good to have different opinions on things. It just makes it a little more interesting too.
That's what's fun to talk about, right?
No doubt. And you know what else I want to talk about real quick? I am getting geared up for elk season, and I need some new gear. But I have absolutely no idea where to find gear at, especially at a good deal. Any ideas?
Oh man, it is tough to find a good deal, man. Have you tried huntinggeardeals.com?
Oh man, that was perfect. I was a little bit corny in getting there, but I think we just rocked that promo.
Yeah. Yeah. That was perfect, man. I think they're going to up their sponsorship level after that good one.
No doubt. I'm not even going to talk about how much they're going to pay us for that, especially for me.
Yeah. Yeah. You know what I'm going to do since you did such a good job on that? I'm going to go buy a bunch of Grizzly Bean coffee. Maybe a 5-pound bag. Do you have something like that available?
I know a guy that sells 5-pound bags for $58. So if you buy 12-ounce bags compared to a 5-pound bag, you save $22 by buying the 5-pound bag. Not bad math there.
Unbelievable.
I know.
I'm gonna buy 10 5-pound bags.
Okay, you officially have a sponsorship deal.
That's how my wife works, right? If you save money on something, you buy more of it. It's actually a good thing because you're saving more money.
I like the way you operate. Hey, you
turn that logic around and you buy stuff on hunting gear deals because you're saving so much money.
Hey, in all seriousness, with Grizzly Bean, you actually did it the right way. You bought 2 bags. You got the flat rate shipping of $6. So no matter how many bags you buy, it's the same $6 for shipping. So it makes more sense to actually buy 2 bags than it does 1 bag. Thank you, Mike.
Hey, man, I'm pretty smart.
You are a smart guy. Well, that was a great show, and we ended it with a great promo, and we're going to continue to work on a great tagline. So stay cool.
Yes. Do something cool. Do something cool before our next podcast. Yeah. You know what, though? We're saying this in the future. That was already our tagline for episode 3.
Oh,
so
yeah.
Us saying stay cool or do something cool in episode 1 isn't going to make any sense until somebody listens to episode 3.
Well, no one would have actually known that until you spoiled it.
Yeah. That's well, they might figure it out because our microphones sound different too. You know, I don't think we give our one listener enough credit.
My mom will not notice, I promise.
Yeah. Anyway, if you are that other listener, make sure you give us a rating and review on iTunes or Podbean or whatever. Man, I listen on Podcast Republic. I don't hear any love for Podcast Republic out there. So if you're listening on that, you can't give us a review because that's not an option. But please subscribe because we do get we'll get bumped up in the ratings for that, and that helps us out a bunch. And also, you'll get a new episode every time we launch one.
We would appreciate it. Hey, it's great talking to you tonight, Mike.
All right, man. I'll talk to you again in 5 minutes when we do the outro for the next episode.
Perfect. Let's do that.
All right.